Anyway, I picked up this piece of paper and I read this. I had never seen it before, but it obviously went back to the time when I was in college. And this is what somebody, whom I do not know who, wrote. He said, "This poem that will be told is from a poet, oh so bold, about an awful crazy cat that was very skinny, not too fat. That crazy cat had a crazy name, that which no other would ever dare claim. The name was as funny as his face. To the Phi Tau fraternity, it brought disgrace. He wasn't American, English, or French. He was a Dago, often caught in the clench. He was a Dago, a Dago, a Dago for life." Yeah, when I finally went to high school, I finally was in a milieu that was so different from my own, and in which I was meeting people that were different than my background. And that's when I began to see that people would look at me differently, and I should add the name was always a problem, because it couldn't be more Italian, Dino Caterini. And I remember even in elementary school, where everybody else had names that were normal American names, Bill, Mike, Paul, you name it. I remember that when the teacher used to take attendance at the beginning of the year, she'd say, go up and down, Bill, Paul, Mike, Jeff, Dino. And at that point, all eyes would look at me, because they had never come across a name quite like that. And I remember thinking at that point I didn't particularly like my name because it was different. I wanted to be like everybody else. It was only later in life I realized the big advantage that there was, because people never forgot my name. They forgot the Bills and the Pauls and the Jims, but they never forgot Dino. Here are some pictures from when I was the homecoming chairman. And of course, the biggest benefit of being homecoming chairman is you got to kiss the homecoming queen. And that's what I'm doing right there before the multitudes. I was interested in girls and they were interested in me, but these were a different type of girl than I had ever known before from the old neighborhood. These were girls that came from different families, girls whose parents had gone to college, girls whose father worked in offices, not in factories. They would go out with me, but they made it plain, literally by telling me that, we can go out, but I can never bring you home to see my parents or meet my parents, because if they knew I was dating you, they wouldn't let me. But it does show very clearly what the image was of the Italian American. First of all, they were dirty, which was the most scurrilous thing I can think of, because there's no people in the world that I know of that are cleaner than Italians. It was true of my own mother. She spent every moment of the day cleaning the house. So the idea that Italian Americans were somehow dirty, even to this day, irks me, because it just was based on no facts whatever. Number two, they were gangsters. You didn't want to have anything to do with them, because they probably are going to end up in jail, or they're going to end up shooting or being shot, whatever. And the third was that they couldn't be taken seriously because they were sex fiends, they were romancers. There was you know, the famous 1920s movie actor, Ralph Valentino, who was one of the most famous people in the world at that time. But of course, everything he played was this romantic person who liked to sweep away women into the desert or into the into the apartment, or you name it. But he was considered a lover. So therefore, Italians were romancers that if you were a girl, you had to avoid, because they obviously were never going to be serious about marriage and family and real life. Literally, my first day of college, which was the like orientation period, but I was a little late when I got there toward the end. But I remember I didn't know anybody, and I'm thinking, you know, what do I do and who do I go to? And anyway, this one guy comes up to me and introduces himself, and I said, well, hi. I said, I'm Dino Caterini. And he stopped and he said, Dean O'Caterini? He said, I've heard of a lot of Irish names, O'Reilly, O'Shea, but I've never heard of O'Caterini. I said, it's not an Irish name, it's Italian, it's Dino Caterini. And he said, oh, you're not Irish? I said, no. He left. I never saw this kid again. But I will say it has had this effect. Every St. Patrick's Day, I become Dean, D-E-A-N-O apostrophe C-A-T-E-R-I-N-I, Dean O'Caterini. I got something from your mommy. People don't realize that the Italian American was very much discriminated against in the early days of immigration. And it's already documented that the biggest single lynching in the history of America was a lynching against Sicilians in New Orleans in the late 1890s. 11 Sicilians were lynched at one time. They had been accused of killing the chief of police, but they had a trial and they were exonerated, but the people of New Orleans, the citizens, were not satisfied with the verdict, and they broke into the jail, took out the Sicilians. Some of them they hung, some of them they shot, but 11 of them were killed. And still to this day, it's the largest single lynching in the history of the United States. This is from when I was at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, and a artist who did caricatures came through. And my buddies in the fraternity in which I was in had him draw me, but they gave him the theme. And the theme is, I had a finger in every pie. And you see what these pies say. Vice President of Phi Kappa Tau, Homecoming Chairman, Phi Beta Kappa, Omicron Delta Kappa, which was a leadership fraternity, social life, and lay politiques, in which I was the president. And of course, my nickname was the Cat, Dino the Cat Caterini. For Italian Americans, there were very few role models. Frank Sinatra came on the scene, and Frank Sinatra also became a very important role model. But what he was noted for among Italian Americans, which a lot of people don't realize even today, that he was one of the few Italian Americans who refused to change his name. Harry James, who was one of the top bands of the big band era, took a ferry across the Hudson River to hear him. And when he heard him, he said, yeah, I want this guy in my band. And he offered Frank Sinatra a job in the band, and they signed a contract. But afterwards he said, Frank, he said, I gotta be frank with you. I think you ought to change your name. You know, an Italian-American name like Frank Sinatra is going to create a negative image of you and it will affect the band. And Frank Sinatra adamantly said, no, if you don't want me with my name, I'm not interested. I had mentioned that I went to Miami University in Ohio, Miami of Ohio, and Miami, the name, is after a tribe of Indians called the Miami Indians. 10 or 15 years ago, the university thought about changing the name because they were known, believe it or not, as the Miami Redskins. So obviously it was a very big issue when the president of the university and the board of trustees thought about changing the name. And they finally came up with a name that I think made a lot of sense. They changed from the Redskins to the Red Hawks. And more importantly, all the songs and the cheers, you could very easily substitute Red Hawks for Redskins. Yay, Red Hawks, yay, Redskins. And there's probably a lesson there maybe for the Washington Redskins. I mean, programs like The Sopranos, Jersey Shore, movies like Godfather, I think helped spread the idea that Italian Americans are somehow involved only with the mob and the mafia. I know that when I was growing up, people would look at me and say, I presume your father was a member of the mafia. And yet that was what most people thought of when they saw anything Italian or saw an Italian-American name. And programs like the Sopranos and movies like The Godfather kind of helped make this image even stronger, or made it more impressed on the public. And those never gave the other side of the picture of the Italian Americans who had contributed so much to America and to the society. All you saw was one side of the story, and that was usually the mafia side, which certainly was a great story, but that was not the image that Italian Americans wanted spread, and it wasn't the image they had of themselves. I went on to be in the Foreign Service, represented my country overseas.
Dina was working for USIA, United States Information Agency, and then I came to work for United States Information Agency. Now, he was going to be in the Foreign Service, and I was going to be in the domestic service, but we had a training course together. And we went in, the first day of classes we went in, and I naturally looked at all the young men in the room, and he was sitting with a girl on one side and a girl on the other side. And I said to myself, he's single. So, and when break came, the first thing Dino does is go to the water fountain. Now, he always goes to water fountains. And I, being friendly and wanting to welcome him to use this, I went up and I said, hello, I'm Fran, welcome to USIA. And he said,
I'm Dino.
Then, somehow I guess we ended up sitting next to each other for the rest of those classes. Turn it off for a minute. How much detail do you want? Then, I think he asked me out that Friday night.
I did.
For dinner. Fine. Now, I knew his name was Dino Caterini, and I naturally assumed he was Italian Catholic. The Italian was all right, but the Catholic wasn't. But anyway, we went out for dinner, and I said, well, now I'll find out whether he's Catholic, because it's a Friday night. So, you know, if he orders a hamburger, I'll know he's not Catholic.
In those days, you
a Catholic never would eat meat on Friday.
Meat on Friday, only fish.
Right. So what does he order? Clam chowder. So I said, I'll bet he's Catholic. Well, he liked clam chowder. It had nothing to do with being Catholic. Okay. You know, they used to call me Micro Mama. You know that? Mm-mm. That was my nickname because I microwaved everything.
What we do usually, we don't go away for the whole weekend. We'll just go far enough outside town to be in the country, away from the city. And we look for little towns we've never been to before, and we'll explore them. Anyway, I only had, after we met, about 5 weeks before I knew I was going overseas. And I knew by that time where I was going, that I was going to Berlin, Germany, and that I would be leaving right after New Year's. And so we had about a 5-week period in which we had to get to know each other and make some decisions. Like, do you want to marry me? I don't think we are a post-racial society yet, but I think we're getting closer and closer to it. And certainly in my lifetime, I've seen tremendous progress made in that direction. I think education in the end is the thing that will make the big difference. I can see the difference between younger people and older people. Younger people tend to accept a multiracial society probably more than the older generation. And I think that's the way we have to go is through education. I think eventually the races will look at each other and see nothing but a human being. I mean, I often think back upon my life, and in a sense I'm rather amazed when you figure the background out of which I came. I had parents, a father who had never gone even one day to school, a mother who only went to the 3rd grade, parents who immigrated from Italy, came to America, could barely speak English. I grew up in a neighborhood that was known as the slums, with no role models in the way of people who had gone to college or who had done almost anything other than working as laborers or craftsmen. Since we got married in 1961, we've gone back almost every year. So we've made it a point to keep in contact with our relatives there because I didn't have any relatives in the U.S. and family is important, and we wanted to make sure that our children and grandchildren knew of their roots and where their grandparents came from. The Dago was what Italians and Italian Americans were called to disrespect them because it's what they were often called when they came over by the millions, and the Americans who had already been there for a long while would call them Dagos as a way of putting them down. Now it's interesting, I've read about it, but nobody knows where the word Dago comes from. One theory is that Christopher Columbus' son was called Diego. He's Diego Columbus. And after they founded the New World, and in what is today, I guess, the Dominican Republic, he became like the governor there. And of course, Columbus flew under the Spanish flag, but he was Italian. His son Diego was an Italian. So it's quite possible that the Spaniards may have resented him and used the word Diego among themselves, not necessarily to Diego himself, because he was a governor. But nobody really knows how this word came to describe Italians in a bad light. But it certainly became the case in America. It was very, very commonly used. It's still used today among certain groups. I think we've been very, very lucky in the way everything turned out. We have 3 wonderful children, 8 wonderful grandchildren. It came out nicely with the grandchildren, 4 boys, 4 girls with our children, 1 girl, 2 boys. That's something you can't really plan for, but it's nice when it happens. And as far as I'm concerned, I had the perfect wife for the career I had because she loved being overseas probably more than I did. So I was very lucky because if you're going to be in the foreign service, it's important that your wife is also committed to that lifestyle. On the whole, very happy with what I accomplished. So no, I don't think I'm a self-made man. I think the society and the country in which I grew up all helped me attain a life that I think was very satisfying and made a contribution to the community and the country.